Well, good evening, guys. My name is Darren Sides. As always, we are here with Gary Weber, and our the person who we put in the hot seat today is Fahim Gurgis. Actually, I think Fahim volunteered to join in today, and so we will talk about today's sermon on the little things. We can cover last week's too if anybody had any questions on it. And Fahim, our guest of honor, is here for a conversation about COVID-19. He was our first ever, I believe, our first ever guest on Sunday Night Talkback.
Well, no, I think it was actually back when we were doing Wednesday nights.
It was a Wednesday, yeah.
Was it? Wow.
Yeah.
Remember that seems like years ago, and it was just like 2 months ago.
It feels like forever ago.
Yeah, it was forever.
It was mid-April, maybe? That was mid-April, I think.
I mean, I don't remember anything besides COVID-19. So,
and there's nothing else to remember.
Yeah, Fahim existed at the beginning of the world, i.e., the start of COVID-19, and so we'll have a COVID update. And Fahim, he prepared tonight. He has some slides for us, and so we will go through them. But thank you guys for joining. And Gary, I'll let you take it away. How do you want to start tonight?
Well, first of all, I'm Fahim. I really appreciate you being with us, and we want to get into any questions that you guys may have based on this morning's message from the Little Thing series, talking about a little thing called money, which isn't such a little thing. But if you'd like to set a question based on this morning's message, you can do that. Type that into the comment box, and we'll address that. While we're waiting for some of those, Fahim, I guess I just want our folks to hear from you, because part of the challenge that we have right now is all the different things we hear about COVID-19 and best practices and what's really going on. So from somebody who's on the front lines with this, and I know you're getting, sources directly from research-based institutions and not just news media outlets. Can you give us just kind of an update on what's going on with COVID-19 and sort of where we are and your assessment of the situation?
Sorry, bad timing with the child in the room. Give me 1 second.
It's live. That makes everybody know we're real.
Sorry about that. Kind of the update right now, I think, is, as everyone can see, and obviously the issue is there's news and there's political involvement and there's all these different things. But I think the reality is that different areas of the country are sort of seeing different patterns right now. And the challenge there is that different parts of the country have shut down in different ways at different times. And some areas are currently doing better, although they were doing worse, like very badly for quite a while, like areas like New York City. And then areas like ourselves in Texas and Arizona, and those are kind of starting to see a resurgence. And a lot of that really has to do with when things were shut down, how things were shut down. The numbers are starting to sort of spike back in our area of the country. So I think that's kind of what's sort of hot and new in the news and in following this. And I think the impression it's giving people now, and people are starting to realize, and myself included, that this is going to be around for a while. This is not going to be something that was going to dissipate with the heat like I was hoping, and many others were, and things like that. I think we've known for a while it would be around, probably at least into the fall, but now I think it's going to be even longer than that.
So what do you, in terms of like the tension between opening back up and going back to work and schools and even church, and the need to manage the spread or try to reduce the impact of the spread, what are some practices and some things that practical advice you would give people as they try to balance the tension that exists between, hey, I've got to make a living, I've got to do things, I've got to open up my business, and I also want to be careful. Can you give some folks what you would say is best practices currently and what you think is realistic as far as how we can all manage this better together?
Yeah, one of the things I was going to talk about, and I'll show my slides in a little bit whenever you guys want, but is just the whole idea of masking, and I think as over time, I've had different feelings on that, but recently, and a lot of the literature has actually come out that's really supporting masking, not just for prevention of spread from pre-symptomatic people, so people who maybe have the infection, but don't know it yet, don't have symptoms yet, or people who have symptoms giving it to others, but also people not getting it if they're wearing a mask. And I was sort of lamenting my ability to work in the hospital and have a cup of coffee, and those days are gone for a while. But you can see now, like, you know, at grocery stores, at department stores, at wherever you go, I mean, everyone's wearing a mask now. And I would really strongly emphasize that, just because I think that's going to be one of the biggest things, in addition to distancing and hand sanitizer and all the other sort of mitigation things. It really is a big deal, especially as we start to see a spike in our state and in our county as well. That's going to be a bigger and bigger and bigger thing, and I think it's one of the strategies we can use to prevent spread.
So a little bit on the masking, because I definitely, that's one of the things that, you know, early on you were hearing different things about, different opinions on, and now it seems to almost be universal, the suggestion that we wear a mask. But let me give you a scenario, because it's actually a real one in my family. So the gym I go to, you go into the building, you have to wear a mask to get into the actual area, because it's a building that has a lot of different things in it. Once you're in the area where the workout is, you don't have to wear a mask anymore. So I think some of us would say there's a lot of examples of sort of the inconsistency of that cause people to wonder, well, if I don't have to wear it here, then what good does it do to wear it there? Can you speak to that a little bit about how, you know, different places, masking, not masking, and how we can sort of understand, is it still effective even in inconsistent situations like that?
Well, I think the inconsistency is what has led to our issue, right? So I think if you look at Taiwan as an example, actually, that country made mandatory masks a thing very early on. And they actually said, we're going to make sure everybody in this country has a mask. And because we're one of the countries that makes a lot of masks, we're going to stop exporting them to other countries. So there's actually an article that sort of went through that. And if you look at places like that who made it mandatory in all the different areas, they actually have seen a very low spread and a lot lower number of cases. In terms of the inconsistencies, well, I would say just like anything else, even if the more you do it, the more effective it's going to be at preventing spread. So saying because we're not doing it consistently, I'm not going to do it at all, doesn't really make sense to me. I would think the more often you can remember to do it, you may go somewhere and say, oh, I forgot my mask and I'll just run in and run out. And that might just be what happens. But if you can remember to have it and do it as often as possible, then I do think that's going to be better in the long run.
And what about the question that some have asked that, you know, and this is, again, mainly some social media posts, but still the question as to, does it prevent me from, if I have it, from spreading it to others? Does it prevent me from picking it up from others? Does it do both? Is it more effective in one?
Yeah. Can I show you a picture? Am I allowed to?
Take over. You run the show. If you want to go through a slideshow, I think now's a good time.
All right, so I just put a couple things because I hear a lot of different things, and this picture, let me see if I can make it. Oh, it's on the wrong screen. Here, I'll just I'm gonna do this. There we go. All right, does that show up?
Sure does.
Okay, cool. So there we go. This comes from an article from a journal called Science, which is a pretty well-read, one of the top scientific journals. And it actually goes through probably a lot more details than anybody cares to know about viral spread and coughing and how do you prevent it. But I really thought this image was worth sharing because you can see in the top figure, you have an infected person who doesn't have symptoms yet. So I would call that a pre-symptomatic person. So somebody's got it. I don't have the cough, cold symptoms yet, but I don't really know I have it. And that happens. And a lot of people don't have symptoms for many, many days until they eventually do develop symptoms, even though they're already infected. You can see you've got your healthy people here, and the person without a mask who's in front of the infected person without a mask is going to have the maximum exposure. If you cover both people, both the infected and the uninfected, you actually decrease the exposure as much as possible. For the person without a mask, that person's actually getting more exposure, obviously in either case, potentially. So that actually, and this article kind of goes through distancing and viral particles and sort of all these different things. But they do make the point, and they cite some pretty good evidence that masks on both the person who doesn't have symptoms or has symptoms and has the infection as helping, and also masks on people who don't have the infection as helping to prevent getting it. So that's one of the first things that I wanted to mention. So I think that's important. States like Colorado have had slogans like this: my mask protects you, your mask protects me. And I think that's a pretty cool thing that they've been sort of putting out there for people to sort of follow. And I think that's a kind of a, it's something that we should be adopting here more and more.
And you said that was from the journal Science. Is that where you said that source of that?
Yeah. I'll back it up so you can see it. But yeah, from the journal Science.
And what about types of masks, Fahim? Is there, in terms of, is that just any sort of face covering, or is there, I mean, obviously you've got heavier duty and then just people using bandanas to cover their face?
Yeah, so anything helps, right? So even the cloth masks, bandanas, I don't know if there's any specific bandana studies, but I will say surgical masks help. They've been shown to help. When you get into healthcare settings, that's been starting to be looked at as well. And then you do see reduced spread with things like N95 masks and eye protection. And there's actually a very recent study that just came out in a big journal that I was actually just reading before this, that showed that with higher levels of protection, there's actually less potential for infection. So so when we're at work in a hospital setting, we're expected to wear both eye covering and masks at the same time. And if we don't have either one of those, it's actually considered an exposure where we actually have to get tested.
Do you know do you have the citation for the study itself? I know where this came from, the journal Science, but do you know do you have the citation for the study itself?
Yeah, yes, I do. Let me stop share for a second. Do you want me to share it in the chat?
I think we're both muted and we're both talking to you. I just want to say it. Christy Johns is on our chat thread, or on the thread on Facebook, and so she was wondering what it was. If you share it, actually, Fahim, if you share it on the chat, I'll copy and paste it over to Facebook.
Okay, give me a sec.
So while you're doing that, I'll give you a second question. So we're also beginning to hear that maybe spread by contact of surfaces is not as big a concern as maybe it was thought early on. Is that true?
I think it's less of a concern than it was. I think it does happen. I'm not sure what specific reference that is, and maybe there's an article there that I need to review, but I do know that one of the things that we were worried about is asymptomatic people who don't ever develop symptoms spreading it. That was a big deal also. Was a big concern, and that seems to be less of a concern than what we had initially been worried about. But I'd say that the biggest risk is the pre-symptomatic group who haven't developed it yet. So that's the one that I would be most worried about.
So what are the major symptoms? I know some of the big ones are the coughing, the fever. I also know that one of Brandy's coworkers, while they were on vacation in Iceland, they got one. They actually caught COVID, and before they came back to work, and the loss of smell, I know is one of the symptoms as well. So, what other major symptoms are there? And I guess what are the stranger symptoms? Like the loss of smell is one that I really hadn't heard of. But what are some of the major symptoms that exist?
Yeah, so cough and fever are sort of the big ones. And then you get into things like severe malaise, or what we call basically fatigue. Like I'm just exhausted, like I have no energy, I can't get up, I don't want to do anything. That's been a big one. Another one has been chest pressure and shortness of breath. So that's kind of unique to it. Things like the flu don't generally cause that. They may cause some shortness of breath, but they don't generally cause chest pressure. We do see people present with confusion, especially in the older population. So they may be a little bit confused from their baseline. Other things like diarrhea, vomiting, we see that in kids actually. Kids will present what we call atypically or with different types of symptoms more often. And we've been seeing some rashes in children that have been really pretty interesting. That's kind of come out and shown that it can cause some other syndromes that haven't really been attributed to this type of a viral illness before, but it's something that we see in kids as well. So, but those would be the major ones.
Yeah, I guess another question I had about masking is what advice to those people who are coming on campus? I know Mark Stapleton today, he was talking about how he never really noticed until he was out last night at a place and watching somebody sing live, and just the way the light was, how much spit actually comes from somebody's mouth while they're singing. And those of us who are preachers know how many times we spit our holy water onto people on the front row. But I guess
since we've reopened, nobody sits on the front row. No,
because they know.
My wife has done it, but yeah, so they avoid the front row, the spray zone.
Yeah. Splash zone, it's like Shamu. But what advice do you have for people who are coming back to church and singing? Is that something with the mask? I know that's something major that at least the news has said to warn people about coming back to church, is especially singing. But
yeah, actually in this article, and I'm going to forward it to you because I can't figure out how to get you the good reference. I have it on the bottom of that slide, but the same article talks about a minute of loud speaking. So I guess that would involve singing, can spread something like 1,000 viral particles. So I'm not trying to freak people out, but since you asked that specific question, it does talk about that. So, and I have to say, so I think there's a couple things, right? In church, I think one of the things our church has done, which has been pretty awesome, is the distancing, right? And I know we needed to do that in order to set up and to open back up. So I think distancing helps. I think masks will help if somebody has an infection and from other people getting it. So I'm not saying that we have to go to that, but since you're asking, would it prevent spread? I would think that it would do that, and it would be safer than doing without. But that said, singing is, and worship with a mask on is just a weird thing, and it's not natural. And even when I've showed up for church, the time that I had it, I would still pull it down naturally when I'm singing and worship, but other times I would have it on. So I think that's the answer, but I don't know if that's going to make it easy for us.
Well, and we try to all face the same direction, which means that you're not singing anybody's face and they're 6 feet apart and those things. But I mean, Fahim, part of it is there's only so much that we can reasonably do. And I guess that's part of the challenge, is at some point you either shut things off entirely or you just take the reasonable action you can take. And I guess one of the questions for you, that I have for you, is at what point do you think we should get to the place where it's probably better just to shut things back down? Or how do you make that decision?
I think the state might end up making that decision for us, even though it may be a delayed decision. I think you already saw bars get shut down Friday. There was basically a mandate for that. It really is going to depend on these numbers, and our numbers are getting pretty crazy. So one thing that Duval has on its side is we're a pretty spaced out town. We're not like South Florida. I think that helps us a little bit, but we are still seeing a spike in our numbers. And with that spike, we are starting to see a spike in hospitalizations. And so as far as when to pull back, I will say, and I'm not saying on the church front, I'm just saying in general, now is probably the time to start doing more social distancing, even just with your family at home, and limiting going out to some degree, because it is really starting to go back up, and it's going to be an issue. Now, as far as the church is concerned, I'll leave that to you, Gary, but I think that we're probably going to have to follow the lead of the state as far as, and the city, as far as what can be open and what can safely stay open.
Yeah, I know that's one thing I got the sense that they're trying to do recently, is really localize these things. And it seemed like Curry was quick on Friday to just shut things down whenever he was ready to. So, so it seems like just listening to local authorities may be the best clue. I know from the church standpoint, one of the questions I got this morning in a house church was, what advice have we received on this? And I think the sad part of the church is that we receive very little advice from any public figures. about anything. And so, so I think it just makes it difficult for us to try and judge what should we do and when should we do it.
Well, and
Yeah.
I think that's, so our approach has been, you give people the options and hope that they make the best information with the best decisions with the information they have. But again, we're committed to following the guidelines of our local and state officials. But again, that requires that they offer some of that to us as well. And so we have set up we have a for those of you interested, we do have a 5-phase plan of sort of reopening ourselves from full shutdown to online only to just normal activity as before, and from phase 1 to phase 5, and we're sort of geared up to know how do we move forward and how do we move backwards. So we may dial it up or dial it back based on the conditions that are going on, and so that we are watching that. It's actually something we talk about almost on a daily basis. It's just kind of knowing where are we in terms of our people. There is a question that did come in. Have you heard of people having false negative results?
Yeah, that does happen. We've seen it. You think about the test, it probably has it depends, but somewhere around 80-90% sensitivity, which means if you have it, is it going to pick it up, right? So that means you're going to miss some. And so we've seen it happen, both in a work setting where we're trying to diagnose someone, and clinically we're pretty sure if somebody's got it and they have a negative test, we will frequently still treat them and isolate them as if they have it. So, and also with the number of changing tests and the types of tests and the fact that so many different companies were making tests and they were doing this very quickly. So there's this ramp up in production and, all these shortages in viral media and all these other agents. So many different kinds of tests meant that nobody could really do really good studies on the performance of these tests, which means that the test characteristics are going to be a little bit variable. And so, yeah, definitely false negatives are a real thing.
So if somebody has been tested and they're negative and they suspect it's a false negative, what would you recommend?
So 2 options. One is get retested. Because, and you could even try a different test, although I'm not sure. A lot of it has to do with sampling and how they get it and everything. So getting another test, whether it's the same or a different test, would be one option. Another option would be to self-isolate for 14 days if they really think they have it. So I would definitely recommend that.
And can you tell us if folks are interested in pursuing a test, how would they go about doing that?
So Lot J, is the federal testing site, and I'm sure it's starting to get busier and busier and busier. I know a couple of weeks ago it was pretty dead, but I'm sure now it's getting busy.
Sort of like during Jaguars games, kind of empty. And
no comment. Yeah, Lot J is an option at Everbank. There are several urgent care facilities that will do it. So I know the Baptist urgent care facilities will do it. The UF urgent care facility will do it. So those are places. I would definitely not recommend going to an emergency room to get a COVID test, because if you're well enough to be walking around and you're okay and you're not sick, like you're going to end up in the hospital, and you just want a test, they're probably not going to give you a test. If you're really sick, then they'll test you. So ERs aren't the way to get a test if you're in pretty good condition.
So in the same lines, Stacy asked, is it possible to have the false positive? And even explaining kind of that idea of false positive and false negative, like what does that mean?
Yeah, it's possible. It's very unlikely, I would say. So when you think about false tests, you're thinking about basically somebody having a positive result, false positive, right? Having a positive result that doesn't have the condition. So that's pretty unlikely. And the reason it's unlikely is because you'd have to detect enough copies of the virus. Most of these tests are what we call PCR tests or RT-PCR tests, where they're basically picking up viral RNA pieces that are then bound to, complementary DNA strands. So basically they'll have DNA that binds RNA from this virus, and it'll tell them that there's a certain amount of virus present in this person. So in order for that test to be false positive, it'd have to be picking up something else that binds that DNA strand, and that's very unlikely. So a false positive is unlikely. I would say any positive COVID test you would want to essentially treat as having it. A false negative is much more common because you may not get enough virus on the sample that you get when you do the test. And people are going all the way back and doing both sides. And I tested both my kids a week ago because they had fevers, and it is not fun for a little kid. But it is what it is. They got popsicles.
So I guess we're now flooding with questions, so I'm trying to do them in a logical order. Are there, while we're on the topic of tests, and then Sherry, I promise I will come back to yours. Are there certain types of tests that are better than others?
Yeah, there are a lot of different types of tests. Although I will say it's pretty hard to know who's using what kind of test. So that's the challenge. I would say the PCR type tests are probably the ones that most places are going to and are probably the most reliable. There are some ELISA based tests that are not quite as good. The ones where they're actually picking up viral, like I said, viral RNA pieces are going to be your most sensitive and specific. And so those are the ones that you really want to probably focus on. If you can figure out what test they're giving at a particular facility, those are the ones that you want to try to get.
So if another question, if COVID is misdiagnosed, so if it's idea is that it's negative and it's misdiagnosed to be something else, what is the most often wrong diagnosis used on like a COVID?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess it would probably in a person who's got viral symptoms, most likely it's some other virus, particularly if they don't have any of the signs or symptoms that are really specific to COVID, like a really bad pneumonia or a really bad shortness of breath or a very bad, ability to breathe with the low oxygen where we have to give a lot of oxygen. So if you come in and you got a fever and you got body aches and you got a cough and you're doing pretty well, a lot of those people go home. And so it's hard to really know. And the instructions are to self-isolate because if they're doing well, they don't get tested from a lot of facilities if they're being discharged, particularly from emergency departments. If they're going to urgent cares, they may do the test anyway and then let you know a day later. But I would say it could be a multitude of other types of viral illnesses. It's so there's just a lot of viruses that sort of present that way with those non-specific symptoms.
Is there any truth to the recent news that's come out in some outlets that O-type blood are less likely to get COVID? Have you seen any studies that indicate that O-types, positive and negative, are more resistant?
That's a good question, Gary. Actually, I'm not familiar with that article. I'd be happy to look at it if somebody wants to send it to me. There is so one of the things that's been a challenge with this is the emerging evidence. It's really hard to keep up with. So I'll be the first to tell you, I haven't read every article that exists. I'm reading as many as I can get my hands on, but I'd love to read it and let you know what I think about it. So if they want to share that with us, I'm happy to do that.
So something from in my head, because I remember when COVID happened, it was my allergy season, and it was like, so I always thought I had COVID like right there at the beginning of the thing, because I had a runny nose and I was coughing at everything. So I guess along with that, if people with allergies, what is a fever guaranteed to happen with this, or usually is it just any of the symptoms to be wary of?
Yeah, no, probably you get a fever at least a third of the time, potentially more, but there's going to be a good number of people who don't have a fever, at least at their initial presentation. They may develop it later, or they may have had it before they came in, but not everyone's going to have a fever. Not everyone's going to have a fever.
Yeah, I know that was one of the things to where it's like everybody just assumed fever is the first thing, and even like the temperature readings when you go in, like the temperature reading happens. But that was one of the questions that's just stuck out to me. Tish asked if someone has COVID, is the quarantine only 2 weeks, or should it be longer?
I think 14 days is a safe amount of time. Could you potentially do longer? Sure. But I think what's recommended is 14 days. That's about right. The reason they came up with that number is because they were seeing the sort of median time to resolving the symptoms somewhere around that number. And they finally said, okay, well, we'll just have to pick that number. It could be longer, could be a little shorter, but 14 days seems like a pretty safe number to recommend broadly. So I would stick with that.
What's the shortest amount of time to where you'll start showing symptoms after being exposed to somebody?
I've seen it happen within a day. But the median time is about 5 days. So most people will have something by 5 days, but it can be as late as 2 weeks. So again, there's that 14-day number, but most people are going to have symptoms 9, 10 days, like 97% of people are going to have symptoms 9, 10 days into it, or after having been exposed to it. That's the most recent numbers that I've found. So once you're at that 10, 12 day mark and you don't have symptoms, it's unlikely that you're going to develop the symptoms.
Well, I think a last question just on like what would this look like if you had it? How long would you suffer if you had it, if you were struggling with COVID?
Sorry, can you repeat that again? I was getting a little feedback.
Yeah, you're good. How long would you kind of show symptoms if you have COVID? How long are you expected to go through the symptoms and have the fever, have the cough, have all the symptoms? How long should people expect to have that if they get COVID?
Yeah, so I think that's the part that makes this condition really difficult, right? Because there's a group of people who get it and they have symptoms for a few days. And after that few days, things start to get better. And, maybe that's a week and everything improves and they're better and they're fine. And I'd say most people are probably in that first group. That's probably 90% of people. But then there's about a 10% group of people who will get really, really sick. And when they get really sick, frequently it's around the 9, 10-day mark. And those are people who can end up on a ventilator or oxygen support and in the hospital for weeks. So it really depends on what group you sort of end up being. And even within those two groups, which are kind of, too oversimplified, there are people who are just, there's going to be differences in those amounts of time. So there are people who are going to be sick for long, long periods of time. It just depends on what happens. And there's so many things that are variable that predict really who's going to end up in what group, and they're not fully known yet. So that's one of the real challenges with this condition is how it affects different people. And one of the things I was going to say is that really young people can get really sick. And with this whole thing, we did see, even the mayor was talking about it, a bump in our ICU cases. Most of the people in our ICUs last week were young, were in their 30s, 20s, 30s. Why? Because as you have an increase in the number of cases, a lot of those cases were coming from that younger population. There will still be a subset of those young people who are all getting it, who are going to end up really severely ill in an ICU. So that is a real thing. So
we just had a question come through. What are the lasting effects of this? I know lung damage can be something associated with this, but is there other issues that are lasting effects on an individual?
Yeah, so I think the lung thing and if you look at people who survive being critically ill in an intensive care unit for a long period of time, it's probably going to be mostly those types of things. So weight loss, loss of muscle mass, weakness, prolonged need for oxygen and shortness of breath, just the inability to sort of do all the things you used to do when you were healthy. Those things become more and more difficult as the longer you're in an intensive care units for sicker people. For people who just develop the common cough, cold symptoms, they'll be fine and they won't have any issues.
Did we cover all of your PowerPoint, or were there other
my points? I'm just gonna cheat sheet real quick and I did want to cover the thing about treatments, because there are so many rumors about what drugs work and vitamins and things like that, and actually what could be potentially harmful. So I wanted to just touch on that real quick. There are two treatments that I know of, and I could be missing some, but that I know of that are potentially effective. One of them is dexamethasone, which is a steroid, and it was shown in a very large, big study done in Europe that it can actually help really, really sick people who either need oxygen or who are on a ventilator and help them get better faster. So that's going to be a treatment that's coming to the forefront in people who are very sick with it. And this is more in the hospitalized side of things. And then there's another drug called remdesivir, which is sort of like, if you know what Tamiflu is for influenza, that drug's also been shown recently to sort of shorten how long people are sick with it when they're in the hospital with it. And so that's another drug that potentially might be effective. So that's been shown in a clinical trial in a pretty meaningful way. Other studies, when I've heard a lot about vitamin D and vitamin C and zinc, and there's a lot of things that were being tried, hydroxychloroquine, all these different things. Really, nothing else that I know of has really been proven and shown to be effective at this point. And so I just want to put that out there because I think there's a lot of rumor, there's a lot of push for potential therapies that could be harmful, where we don't really know that they will actually have a benefit. Maybe they could be harmful on these patients. So pushing for a lot of the use of those drugs and off-label use is, I think, a potentially bad thing. And so we want to really stick with where we know what's going to work, or investigate those things in clinical trials. So, and I do encourage that as well. So, yeah, so I wanted to mention that.
I know one thing just with PT, with Brandy, one thing that they were asked to do early on was, flip people over and put them in a prone position. So kind of belly up or belly down. Yeah. What is that still, like, if somebody isn't going to the hospital and doing that, but let's say they get a positive diagnosis and they're going to suffer it out at home because they're not bad enough to go to the hospital, is that something they should do, is just lie around the house kind of, face down? Or
they could, but I would say the reason you do that is to help people oxygenate better. That seems to be helping them with that. If you're to the point where you're that short of breath, you need to be in a hospital. Because I wouldn't recommend you doing that alone at home. That means, yeah, you need to be taken care of in a hospital. Can I mention one other thing along those lines? I know there was also another rumor that I sort of want to, it looks like we lost Gary.
We're good. We got the A team here, so it's okay.
Okay.
Oh, he's back.
Coming back.
We can't say that. Yeah, go ahead. What else? Yeah.
What I was going to say is the whole ventilators thing. I know there was a lot of stuff going around about ventilators killing people and things like that. And, that's absolutely not true. I think one of the issues we saw with an emerging new disease was doctors and nurses trying to figure out how to take care of this well. And so what happened in the beginning is patients would come in with very low oxygen numbers. And what we were told, and this is still true, is that you can't use any of the non-invasive machines that we used to use on people who normally are having problems breathing. And the reason you can't use those machines is because they spread virus everywhere. So unless you're in a negative pressure area, the whole place is going to get it. And so a lot of places can't isolate that way. They don't have the resources and things like that. So what was happening very early on in the course was that they were recommending people with very low oxygen levels be put on ventilators early on. Well, the paradigm sort of shifted because, as we saw, a lot of these people actually did better breathing on their own than we realized initially. And this just came with experience because people were starting to publish case series and studies were coming out. And then the doctors started to realize, wait, I think these people can actually tolerate not being on a ventilator as early as we thought. And maybe that actually ends up being better for them. So, the idea of ventilators killing people, actually, no, ventilators are just associated with really, really sick people, right? It's kind of like saying chemotherapy kills cancer patients. No, actually, chemotherapy treats cancer, but a lot of patients who die of cancer, maybe the chemotherapy didn't work, and so you'll find an association there, right? So I just wanted to make that very clear, that ventilators aren't killing people, but we have learned strategies of when and who really needs it more than we did in the very beginning, and that's just the issue of dealing with a completely new condition that we've never seen before.
So back to masks, Casey asked a question about, given the N95s are off the market, so it's really hard, you can't find them anywhere. Is there a way, or what's the best way to equip a mask so that it protects the wearer well? So what just kind of mask guides can you give to us?
Anything that's got a good seal around your face, like even those KN95 masks and anything that has a good seal, that has a good seal around the bridge of the nose, and the more closed off it is, the better it's going to be at protecting you. A surgical mask really is just a barrier, right? So same thing with a bandana or whatever, but the ones that seal off as much as possible, those are the best ones.
And when we're wearing cloth masks, still wear them over your nose too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like this kind of thing, like the mask down here, that kind of drives me nuts, right? That's why masks on patients don't work that well, because everybody puts it down here and that essentially does nothing. So yes, you got to cover your nose and your mouth.
Oh man, Mark just wrote a really, really long question, so it's going to take me a second to read this.
Okay.
My understanding is that we've had 64 COVID-related deaths in Duval County, at least 33 from 31 deaths outside the facility, inner city. Am I missing something here? All right, here. We'll jump to this one before I get to that one. Should cloth masks be washed daily?
Oh, great question. I think it kind of depends on how you store it, because it can become an infectious risk, right? Like you can be wearing this thing and you can get stuff on it and then you can infect yourself. And that happens in the healthcare setting. I mean, not happens, but that's one of the things we worry about in the healthcare setting. So we have ways of cleaning our masks. And that's why we had been on reuse. Many hospitals throughout the country have been on sort of reuse protocols. So I would say you can probably use it a couple of times, particularly a cloth mask, before you have to wash it. If you're just a normal person. If you're in a healthcare setting, then you really have to do something else and go by your institution's protocols. But I think you could probably use it a couple times. But if it gets soiled or you think you had an exposure or something like that, then you definitely want to wash it, and you want to wash it hot. That kind of sort of common sense.
So I'll synthesize, Mark. And Mark, I apologize if I'm not asking your question correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So what should we make of the fact that 33 of the deaths in Duval County came from 2 ALFs, and 31 have come outside of ALFs? Is there what should we make of that? Should that give us some positivity, or should that give us some caution? And what should we do with that information?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it gives you is that the highest risk scenarios are people in close contacts for prolonged periods of time, where one of them gets it and many, many other people get it. So, not just ALFs, but many other settings like that, where somebody has it and they're in another setting, in a setting with other people for a while, then they can spread it around. So yeah, and also you think about ALFs being mostly older folks, right? Mostly older folks who have other medical problems. And those are the people who are at the greatest risk. So I think one thing I would learn from that is, our older parents or relatives or church members or whoever they are, we got to protect them. If you want to bring them groceries and make sure so they don't have to go out too much, or have them have groceries delivered or whatever it is, those are the people you really want to be careful with. I'm going to go visit my parents for the first time in 5 months this coming weekend, but we're going to all get tested before we go, just because I don't want to take that chance. And is the test perfect? No, but I think it's better than not having the test. So that would be one thing it teaches me. As far as the other people who got it, then I think it's a variety of things. It's hard to make much from that, but like I will say, diabetes, other medical problems, chronic conditions, those things put you at higher risk, and also the older population. But we're still learning really what's going to make people at the greatest risk for that.
We'll hit this one last question, and it's probably yes or no. So we'll hit that, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. And guys, thank you for the questions tonight. We'll have Fahim back on. It seems like this is still a hot topic that you guys wanted to continue to discuss. So we'll bring Fahim back on. But kind of the last question, are those who do not wear glasses more vulnerable? Should everyone follow the look of Fahim and Darren and just wear glasses nonstop?
Well, I will tell you, these have helped protected me from my 3-year-old poking me in the eye a bunch of times. So that's a pretty good reason to wear them, but I'm just kidding. I don't, so when you look at eye protection and protecting mucous membranes, it's really wraparound eye protection. When you've got viruses floating around your face, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe it'll protect you from something projectile into your eye if somebody coughs, but you really want something like this. And I personally would think that's a little bit overkill for somebody who's just out going to the grocery store. I don't think that's absolutely necessary. I think if you're in a setting where you're take care of patients, then yes, absolutely.
Cool. Well, thank you, Fahim. We didn't get a chance to talk about Fahim. You're the man. Casey just wanted you to know that.
You're the man, Casey.
But thank you guys for watching. Just want to, this isn't just information for you. I think what's important is taking all this information and synthesizing it. And for us as a church, strategizing how should we still live out the gospel and present the gospel in this time of COVID. I think that's something that we just need to conceptualize and just think through. Both we do as pastors, but I think that every individual member, deacon, really think through this. How should we still do our mandate of sharing the gospel, of going out into the world and sharing the gospel in the midst of this current circumstance with COVID? Because the Great Commission hasn't taken a break just because COVID is currently going on. So we encourage you to continue to pray about that, continue to think on that as it relates to you personally. And then I'll just do a call for our SALT meeting. It's our leadership meeting, July 19th. We're going to kind of discuss some plans that we have about how do we react and in some ways continue to share the gospel and really share the gospel in new ways with this new time. So SALT meetings aren't some secret meeting where everybody wears a robe. It is actually open up to anybody who wants to come. So if you're interested, July 19th will be our SALT meeting, and we just want to remind all of our leaders to come to that, but also extend it to anybody who wants to hear about ways that they can continue to share the gospel and continue to be involved here at Southside Baptist Church. Gary, any final thoughts from you?
No, thanks, Fahim, for coming back on and sharing with us and for the work you do every day for our community. And we appreciate you and all of our medical staff. We've got a lot of medical folks at our church, and they're doing a lot of great work, and we appreciate each and every one of you and are praying for you regularly. And Darren, thank you. And thank you everybody for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I will send out the article about masks that we mentioned. I'll just send it to Darren. Maybe he can share it on Facebook.
Yeah, send it to me. We'll get it up on Facebook as a comment, and I'll send it to Christy Jones.
Sounds great.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks again.